It's Curtis here. For my iOS midterm presentation, I decided to cover Firebase authentication right there. So Firebase authentication, of course, belongs to Firebase, created by Google. If you don't know what Firebase is, it's essentially like it's an arsenal of tools to polish and dramatically optimize your app. It's got tons of built-in products such as cloud storage, analytics, machine learning, authentication hosting, database storage, performance monitoring, in-app messaging, all this good stuff to, incredibly increase the robustness of your app. So I'm just going to be focusing on the authentication side on this tutorial, which actually has built-in Google Analytics to it. In any user-based app, authentication is a huge part, and getting it implemented into your app, the simpler the better, until you're really dealing, down the line in the more complicated side of things. But for most users, developers, Firebase authentication is going to cover exactly what you need. It's got back-end, easy-to-use SDKs, and really sleek-looking pre-made libraries that are super portable, modular. You can just drop them into any view controller you're using. And instead of doing your UI design, Firebase has got you covered. So Firebase's authentication is compatible with multiple platforms. We have iOS, Android, web apps supported, C++ support, Unity, Node, and Java. And they also have multiple sign-in methods as well. We can see here that you can have users sign in with email and password, email link authentication. This is a little more complicated. It's via a process called deep linking. That's where you provide your email, and they email you a link, and then you open your email, and there's a link inside there. Once you click it, it redirects you to the app and signs you in that way. A little extra security and a little more complicated. For the purpose of this tutorial, we're not going to be focusing on it. Google, Facebook, Twitter, GitHub, Microsoft, Yahoo, iOS Game Center, phone number. You can even use your own custom authentication system if you require more information from the user. For this tutorial, we're only going to be focusing on email, password, Google, Facebook, and I believe that is all. So the great thing about Firebase is instead of doing things the old-fashioned way where you have to create your own database, and every time a user signs in or registers, you got to do a query to make sure the user exists, and maybe store a token or validate whether the password and username are in the right format. Firebase handles all of that for you. It even creates a automatic user table, kind of its own private database, just for the purpose of logging users in, rather than you having to do all that yourself. It even handles validation for passwords. You can pass a validation preference to Firebase. Say you want your user to log in with an uppercase letter, a couple numbers, and a special character. Firebase can do that. It can handle it. At the moment, its default authentication is, I think it's a minimum of 6 digits, 6 characters for a password. So let's jump into it. Now, starting off with Firebase in your projects, you need to add Firebase to your project via CocoaPods. If you don't have CocoaPods, you need to install them. I won't be going over that in this tutorial. It's very straightforward though. In your pod file, you're going to need Firebase authentication, Firebase analytics, and we're also going to add something called Firebase UI right there. So I've already done that to this project, so I'm going to show you what I've done on the console. The console I've created here, so this is my project overview. You can see all the options we have here. We got database, storage, hosting, all this extra stuff. Database is actually Firestore, which is Firebase's cloud NoSQL real-time database. It comes in handy. It is very popular and very effective. However, we won't be using it for this demo. So if you click on the authentication tab, here's the table I'm talking about where you can store all your current users. There's none here yet, but there will be a few once we get using the app. We have our sign-in methods. This is where you can enable or disable the methods via your app. You can see I have email and password, Google, and Facebook enabled. We also have a templates tab here, which is some miscellaneous stuff. For example, if you're going to do the email linking, you can customize the email that they're going to receive and do a couple other settings here. So in the meantime, I am going to show you the practical side of things. So a lot to take in right now, but I'll just go to the storyboard here. So the way I've designed it for this tutorial is I have 3 possible paths a user can take, 1, 2, and 3 at the very top there. So the first view controller here is going to handle a brand new user registering. And then I've got a simple welcome screen with a sign out button. I have down here another view controller that handles an existing user signing in, another welcome screen. And keep in mind, these are both custom UIs I've made myself. And then the other view controller, this is all Firebase UI. You can see there's not much to it right now because Firebase UI typically doesn't render on the storyboard. However, we will see it in action. It's quite interesting how it works. So code-wise, I've got 2 view controller Swift files. I have one that handles strictly the custom UI that I made, just to show how easy it is to implement it via function. And I have another view controller that handles the Firebase UI layout. So let's take a look here. So if we open up the assistant, and we're going to strictly focus on the custom-made UI. So I've made some references, some outlets to the text fields on these 2 screens. I made this one view controller file cover these 2 screens. It's not the best coding practice, but I wanted to include that just to include it all in here for the tutorial. Now, the reason I made these outlets is because I'm going to need to grab the input from these text fields. So I declare them at the top of the file here. You can also see I've imported Firebase and Firebase authentication at the top there. Now, I got this function here, register, and this is going to run when this register button is tapped. Essentially what it does is it pulls the username and password that's been entered in the 2 text fields and passes to this Firebase function. This Firebase function is called create user, and it's called on an auth object. So this is a Firebase auth object. What you do is you pass in the 2 parameters. We've got a username and a password, which we've obtained up here, and it's that easy. So it gives you the option to error handle here. So if there is an error, we can print it to the console and see it. And then I have a little error label up here that will show if there is one. And then otherwise we print created to the console, and we're just going to perform a segue to the welcome screen here. So let's see that in action, shall we? So we're going to log in with a new user. Here we are. So let's go with test@test.com. And because the password needs to be at least 6 characters, just to be safe, we'll go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Once we click register, as a new signed in registered user would be. So we're going to take them to the welcome screen. You can also see down here on the console we have created, so it was a success. And if we look at the user table in this authentication section, remember I said this table holds all the currently active users in your app. If we refresh it, we can see that the user has been registered. And you have the provider. This tells us that it's been a via email password combination register, date created, last date signed in, and we have a unique user ID string here. Now, if we go back here, I have this sign out button, which literally calls this sign out function here. So this is going to call when the sign out button is tapped. And now we're calling a built-in Firebase function here called sign out. We call it a bit differently. So we create a Firebase auth object up here, and we put a nested try-catch statement in this do block. And you literally just call sign out. And this is what I've added. It's just going to pop back essentially off the stack to the main view controller. And if there's a sign out error, it's going to print that to the console for whatever reason. So if we click sign out, current user is signed out and return back to the main screen. Now we have down here, this is to sign in an existing user. So if we go down here, I have a sign in function, and this is going to be called when the sign in button is clicked. Once again, I'm grabbing the email and password from the two text fields, and I'm calling this Firebase function called sign in, once again called on an auth object. You pass in the email and password as parameters. If there is an error, print the error to the screen. Otherwise, we're going to perform a segue to the welcome screen and print success to the console. Let's try and run that again and see how it goes. So we're going to click sign in with password. We're going to use that test@test.com and password 123456. Sign in. Voila. It recognizes that is a valid user and signs us in. And we'll sign out. Now, just to show Firebase's validation features, we'll go back here. Now, say if I want to sign in with a user that hasn't been created yet. So we'll go test1@test.com. And we'll go password 123456. If you try and sign in, nothing will happen, and we'll get the proper error printed to the console where it says there is no user corresponding to this identifier. The user may have been deleted. This is Firebase doing its job and querying the table and knowing that there's no existing user. And now it's up to the developer to handle this and decide where they want to go from here. In this case, I just wanted to show that Firebase is working properly and giving us the right response. We can also do this. Say we want to go back to register and register with the original email that we had registered with. Now, we want to keep our app with all unique users, therefore the username must be different for each user. If we try and register, we're also going to get this oops, username already taken label show up. And if we go to the console, we can see the email address is already in use by another account. There's Firebase doing its job again and returning the proper response and handling our validation for us. This is really handy. Firebase also has built-in functions where we can get the current user signed in and extract its data and use that data as we wish. I didn't implement it in this tutorial, but it would be handy to use in the future, however you want to process the current signed in user's data. Now, last but not least, we're going to focus on this Firebase UI, which is very handy. So, in this class FUI view controller, we're going to import Firebase UI at the top. Now, most of the functionality and the setting up of this view controller happens in the view.load function. Basically, what we're doing is we're creating a new default Auth UI object. We're making an array of all the providers we wish to use. In this case, we're going to use the Facebook authentication, Google authentication, and email authentication. And this is going to enable the Firebase UI for these three methods. We're going to assign the Auth UI object providers to this array so it knows which providers it's using. And now we're also going to make a new view controller variable, and we're going to assign the Auth UI and assign an Auth UI view controller object. Now we're going to call this method this function called present. Essentially, it just knows that this view controller is going to present the UI to the layout. Now I do just a little bit of error handling here. I do a function here called checked login. This calls a built-in Firebase function called add state did change listener, and that essentially can check if there's a user logged in or not. If there is, then we can or decide what we want to do from there, and if not, we can decide what we want to do from there. And I've also added a sign out function, or the Firebase sign out function, and that's going to just return us to the home screen. This doesn't look like much, and it really isn't much. It's more Firebase kind of working its magic. However, when we run it, we'll see how it really looks. Personally, my favorite is the Firebase UI because it really gives your app that sleek sign-in look. So if we go ahead and click on the option on the home screen here, sign in with options or sign in options. Here we are. So this is Firebase UI at work here. And these buttons I haven't designed or anything. This is all supplied by the Firebase UI library. And here are three providers. We have Facebook, Google, and email. If we try and sign in with Facebook here, it's gonna ask us our permission. And it just pops up modal. This is all Firebase UI, of course, using the Facebook interface. We're gonna click continue here. And just like that, we're signed in. And this is the home page here. And for demonstration purposes, I'm going to sign out. Now back to the user table. If I refresh this, look, we can see I've signed in via provider Facebook, date, unique user ID, exactly as we planned. If we go back here, let's try Google. And we'll go ahead and success. Sign out again. Here I am logged in with Google. And last but not least, email. Now we're going to sign in with the original email that we used, the test email. And the password. Look at that. Fantastic. Signed in, recognizing the email. And from that, the world is your oyster in terms of getting users signed in to your app. So, I mean, overall, when it comes to Firebase authentication, I think it's a super handy tool for developers. I think there's so many customizable options. I think it really pays off in the long run when you're trying to save time or you're trying to, streamline your app or make it more efficient. But there's a couple downsides I found dealing with Firebase authentication, a couple drawbacks. The main one was that I found the documentation to be very vague sometimes and hard to understand. They give you these code snippets, but they don't actually, especially for iOS, they don't tell you which file to put it in. And it's very generalized and open at some parts. And I also found that these functions that they expect you to call, some of them, due to the constant updating of the Swift language, become deprecated very fast. And you can't just go by copying this code and putting it right into Xcode, because you're going to get tons of errors saying that these are not valid functions, or these functions don't exist in the Auth library or in any of these classes. So I found myself going to third parties or Stack Overflow to find actual working code that could actually do what I wanted it to do. So that being said, it is worth the time to get over the speed bumps and actually find working code, because Firebase it's fantastic when it comes to getting users logged into your app. So I hope you found this helpful, and I hope if you're ever using a user-based app, you decide to try Firebase. And I hope this has made it simple for you. Thanks for watching.